Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lawrence Russell. I'm the president of the Rittenhouse Mastermind, a group I founded about 5 years ago with about 20 other professionals in Philadelphia. And we are a like-minded group of business professionals in the greater Philadelphia area who came together to better ourselves both personally and professionally through collaboration, groupthink, and like-minded activities. And above and beyond that, we all strive to help educate and make the world a better place. And with all of the events that unfolded over the last 2 weeks, a few of us got together and expanded this to the group and thought that it would be a very powerful and important thing to put on an educational presentation about race in this country. And it's my pleasure to introduce Chantel Fitzgerald. She's going to be our host and moderator for this event. She's a wonderful friend, a wonderful business leader. She owns a company called Mindset Strategies Incorporated. She helps develop leaders across the country, Fortune 100 companies, all the way down to small businesses, through being more effective by being present and being mindful of what's going on a minute-to-minute, hour-by-hour, day-to-day basis. She's helped me and many other folks that I've worked with for the years. She is a certified mindfulness coach and trainer, and she has a master's degree in nonprofit and NGO leadership from the University of Pennsylvania. And she serves on the boards of PHL Diversity and the Equity Project. And she is an all-around wonderful woman. And I will turn it over to you, Chantel, to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larry. Yeah, thanks a lot. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm super thrilled, and this conversation is definitely needed. So before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to just take a minute to arrive, just to settle us and to settle ourselves, to just be present here in this moment. So feel free to find a comfortable and yet alert position. And we can actually begin by either closing our eyes or keeping them open and just lowering our gaze. And let's begin by just feeling the weight of our bodies in our chair, helping us to bring presence to this moment. And also helping us to ground ourselves to being right here, right now. Now see if you can locate your breath. See if you can bring your attention to one full inhale and one full exhale. Now see if you can bring your attention to one full cycle of your breath, from the inhale to the exhale. Our breath is our life force. And let's give gratitude to the breath that we're breathing in this moment. Now I'd ask that you set an intention. What is one thing that you hope to learn or get out of today? Or maybe it's just an intention to be open to listening, to learning, but whatever it is, just set your intention. And in a moment, I'll ring the bell. And feel free to open your eyes and bring your attention back to the room. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you feel a little bit more centered and grounded. Now I would like to introduce our panelists. So first off, I'm going to start with Marcus. He's in my left-hand corner here, and we'll go around to Varsovia, Dawn, and Samira. So, all right. So we've got Marcus Allen. He is the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters, a highly influential individual in Philadelphia. He serves on the board of the United Way. He is a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Fells Institute, and has done a lot when it comes to youth development. And his passions are in youth, really helping with youth and mentorship, as he's been leading Big Brothers Big Sisters for the last 7 years. And perhaps many of you might even want to become a big as we continue this conversation to really help support those that don't have mentors, especially youth and young people, particularly in Philadelphia. So thank you so much, Marcus, for being here. I'm really excited to have you here. And yeah, so that's a little bit about Marcus. Next, we have Don Trahan. Dr. Don Trahan Jr. is a licensed professional counselor, national certified counselor, approved clinical supervisor, professor of counseling at the University of Southern California, an international consultant. He is recognized as a global leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, change management with a demonstrated history of working in our higher education and professional industries. So Don Trahan, thank you so much. Dr. Don Trahan, thank you so much for being here. And he's actually also in the process of getting his doctorate in business administration and does a lot of consulting in the diversity and inclusion space. So thank you so much, Dr. Don, for being here. And yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Next, we have Varsovia Fernandez, who is a prominent executive with over 15 years of combined experience in not-for-profit and financial services, software technology, and e-commerce industries, active in business and philanthropic communities. Ms. Fernandez is a recognized authority on Hispanic cultural, governmental, and educational affairs, and how those affairs impact business. She has worked to maximize government and corporate relations as an advocate of the Latino community. In her former role as CEO to the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Fernandez created a voice for Hispanic businesses in the Philadelphia region by focusing on growing Latino markets and advocacy and her leadership. Varsovia, Ms. Fernandez has also been an executive in Commerce Bank, working with financial institutions, as well as leads her own company now in business consulting. So thank you so much, Varsovia, for being here. I'm grateful to have you. And then we have Samira Williams. Samira Williams is a licensed psychotherapist, certified advanced addiction disorder counselor, adjunct professor of trauma recovery coach, writer, and co-founder of the podcast Hey Girl, Thrive, mama of a brilliant, and Hey Girl, Thrive, and mama of a brilliant, beautiful 9-year-old princess. Though through a trauma-trained integrated approach, Samira supports women in healing the past, cultivating empowerment through healing, releasing the past, and embracing thriving as a lifestyle through fully embracing self-leadership in all areas of life. So Samira is an incredible woman. I follow her on Facebook. She has an incredible Facebook group. I believe it's called Speak Up, and she does a lot of great content in regards to self-care and really taking care of ourselves and working through this trauma that we're all experiencing. So thank you so much, Samira, for being here, and looking forward to the conversation. So just so everybody knows, I also just want to put out a little bit of housekeeping items. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to ask a question specifically, and feel free to use the chat if you just have a comment or you agree, or any type of chat conversation that you want to have. Feel free to type that in the chat, okay? So we want to just make sure we leave the Q&A specifically for Q&A. All right, so without further ado, we are going to get started with our panel and discussion on race. How did we get here, and where do we go from here? So let's get started. So I'm going to ask Greg if he can play the video.
All rise.
Okay, now we're going to have a poll. So we would love for you to participate in this poll. And so, Greg, can we launch that first poll after seeing that video? So the first poll is, would you like to be treated the same way a Black person is treated in this country? So please go ahead and respond to that poll question. Would you like to be treated the same way a Black person is treated in this country? So we'll pause here for a moment just to allow participants to answer this question. Again, would you like to be treated the same way a Black person is treated in this country? And of course, just seeing that video, would you like to be treated similarly? So we'll pause here. We've got 85% of the votes in so far. All right, so looks like we've got a good majority. And so what came out? Wow, 100% of people said no. Look at that. 100% of the people that responded said no. So that really just goes to show that we all know what's actually happening in this country. We all know that Black people are not being treated the same. So why are we allowing this to happen as a society? Why are we allowing this to happen? If we ourselves would never want to be a Black person in this society, why are we allowing this to happen to our Black citizens in the United States? So let's get started. And let's talk about racism, and let's talk about race. So the first question I have to the panelists is, what is your earliest memory of becoming aware of racism? So I'm gonna kick this off with Samira. What is your earliest memory of becoming aware of racism?
My earliest memory was my grandmother really sharing. Her parents were Jim Crow croppers in Kentucky, and so she would share when I was a kid, all of the things that we shouldn't do, that we couldn't do. She would encourage my brothers, not to be out late and not to be alone. And so I would begin to ask questions about like, why are there different rules? And she would explain, that very bad things happen to people of color in Kentucky for a long time, and that though white people don't always mean to be or have that ill will, hatred can come out. And so I had a kid at school who would always kind of have an issue with me, and I didn't understand why. And then one day he called me the N-word. And so when I shared that with her, she tried to normalize it. And I could just see in her face that she was trying to protect me, but I felt as though like something's wrong here. Like why do children treat one another this way? And I remember being like 5 years old and just realizing something's wrong, like something's wrong with the situation. And she didn't go in depth about it, but she would share that there were injustices that were always that way and probably wouldn't change. And I had to adjust my mindset and my behaviors to live in a world that had these injustices.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. 5 years old. Incredible. Dawn, same question. What is your earliest memory of becoming aware of racism?
So I grew up in a predominantly white community, and I recall very similar, my family sitting me down and having that conversation in preparation for what school may be like. And being in school, it was evident that, not many people clearly look like you. And I remember just being treated differently. And one of the things that I do distinctly remember was very similar, being called the N-word and being visibly treated differently than some of the other students. And so I would talk about that when I would get home, and it was evident that this is what we were trying to prepare you for, because while we may live in a community with individuals, your experience will not necessarily be the same. So I was in elementary school as well when that happened to me.
Wow. Elementary school. Yes, all very young, before we were 2 digits, before we were 10 years old. Thank you for sharing that, Dawn. Varsovia, yes, same question. What is your earliest memory of becoming aware of racism?
So I grew up in the Dominican Republic, and my family is fairly mixed. You find everything from very dark black to chocolate to blue eyes to green eyes. So I don't have a recollection of having a racial experience before the age of 12 when I moved to Puerto Rico, and I was in the swimming pool. And this little girl, she was about 10, asked me to show her my feet. So she looked at my foot, inspected my foot where the skin meets the end of the foot, the bottom of the foot, and said, yep, you're white, I can play with you. And I didn't know how to react to that. So I went to my brother, who was in his 20s, much older, and my brother said a cuss word and said, stay away. And I just never saw the little girl again. So then when we went home, it was explained to me that, it was a very painful experience because I have, I have a lot of African in my family. I am mixed.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. And Marcus, yeah, same question. What is your earliest memory of becoming aware of racism?
I think similar to your panelists, mine happened in elementary school. Just to give the audience some background, I grew up in the rural South. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, grew up in a rural town of about less than 6,000 people. It's probably 60% white, probably almost 38% black. Most of the town is poor. And we lived in a neighborhood, there were some white people who lived in our neighborhood, and there was a white guy who lived down the street, and who was very nice. Every day he would pass up and down the street, and when he would walk to the convenience store where he managed right around the corner from our house, and he always spoke to us. And then one morning, my mom was running late, so we had to go to the store earlier than we normally go to the store. And I remember I had to probably be 6 or 7, and we walk in the store, and that same guy sees my mom. My mom's name is Nell. And he said, Miss Nell, you know, it's too, with that real Southern twang. You know, it's too early in the morning for us to be serving niggas. And so as a 7-year-old, that like struck me, because I was like, but this is the same white guy that is so nice to us in the community, right? And then as I got older, it became very evident. And I grew up, like, my closest friends were white when I was younger. When I was 5, 6 years old, I always bonded with the white students in my class. And I just want to remind people, when I grew up, I'm 48 years old, it was this thing about white assimilation, right? And so in order to be successful in school as a kid, the more white you were, the more successful you were. And that was more accepted during that time. It was a culture in this country where white assimilation was the thing to be in order to be successful. So we had a lot of that down south, and I don't think that's much different than anywhere else in the country.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories, all of you. And I think that really helps to frame our conversation today, and just really feeds on the video and all of our experiences in racism. And so, you know, and my earliest, and I'll just share just to be cohesive here, is, you know, being a young kid and a young white person had called me an Oreo. And I didn't know what that meant before. And I was like, oh yeah, I like Oreos, not realizing what that really meant, but it was saying that I'm Black on the outside and white on the inside. And that I didn't really kind of fit in to being white or Black or whatever. So, and I'm maybe like 8, 9 years old. So racism touches all of us. And so I want to put out a poll. And if we could put out, I guess, poll number 3 to help cue us for the next question. Do you agree that policies and laws in America disproportionately benefit people of the white race? So we'll give this a little pause here, allow people to answer this question. Do you agree that the policies and laws in America disproportionately benefit people of the white race? So feel free to take that poll. And this will help cue us up for our next question. All right. Again, do you agree that the policies and laws in America disproportionately benefit people of the white race? Do we have a poll? Or 97% said yes, with only 2 people saying no. So beautiful. 97% agree that the laws are disproportionately benefiting white America. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the systems of oppression that have held Black people back for over 400 years. How did we get here? What is the economic impact? And what are these systems? So I'm gonna ask that question to Marcus. Can you talk a little bit about the systems of oppression? How did we get here, and what has been the economic impact of these systems of oppression?
Well, Chantel, that's a really loaded question with not a lot of time to answer it. But what I will say, you know, I think it starts 401 years ago. Actually, it starts a little bit before that, but definitely 401 years ago when the first slaves were brought to Jamestown, Virginia. But actually goes a little bit further than that in the 1600s when the Catholic Church decided to give the Portuguese and the Spaniards permission to use humans as cattle. And from that delegation by the Catholic Church all over the world, people were able to now legalize slavery. And so when it came to us in the US and the Pilgrims brought the slaves, our economy was based on that free labor of those slaves. And even when slavery ended, and you went into Reconstruction, they started to create police. And what many don't know is the police initially were created to keep the slaves in line towards the end of slavery, and particularly after slavery. And so I learned all this. I went to HBCU, for those of you who don't know, historically Black college and university. And so growing up down South for me, and not really hearing a lot of history of people who look like me, it left me feeling inferior. And so I didn't really feel like a whole person until I went to this HBCU where I had these amazing Black and brown and white professors who really focused on teaching us the history of Black folks. And so going back, so when I learned that, and it talked about how police after slavery, in order for particularly down South, to keep their economy going, police would arrest Black folks for loitering, for just some of the most simple things. They would make up things to arrest Black folks, and then they didn't have the money to get out of jail. So in essence, they kept that slavery going even after slavery. And so, hopefully this sounds familiar to you, because now we see that we have mass incarceration and so many Blacks in jail. We make up 25% of the incarceration of the entire world. About half of those are Black people. And so from a systemic and economical standpoint, there are so many systems that hold Black people down. And many times we focus on mass incarceration, but we forget about mass arrest. Some men that I know have been stopped and arrested over 40, 50 times, never charged with anything. And then we can't forget about redlining. We can't forget about, predatory lending. You go to any city in America, and you will see there's this imaginary train track, and you will see wealthy, affluent communities on one side, and you will see low-income communities on the other, really full of Black and brown people. That doesn't, poor Black people don't just want to live around each other, right? That's a system at play that kind of pushes them into these sorts of living arrangements. So, and then for myself as a CEO, I see it in the workplace every day. I see returning citizens. I see, even in my own organization, Black people. We don't have a lot of them. We have about 100 employees, probably about 10%, maybe 15% of our employees are Black. In a city like Philadelphia, which is a majority minority city, meaning that we have more Black people here than any other population. And the organization brought me in as their first African-American CEO in its 100-year history. So when you think about the fact that Big Brothers Big Sisters serves probably about 65, 70% Black population, right? And it took them 100 years to hire a Black man as their CEO. And then when you look at the organization, it is disproportionately white, but we're serving the Black community. That says a lot. And we know that representation matters. And so you find this in corporations and nonprofits across the city, across the country. So there's so many ways that this system is a barrier for Black folks. And the last thing I'll leave you with is I'm the chair of our DEI initiative for the country, for Big Brothers Big Sisters. And people always say, well, Marcus, can you just break DEI down in one sentence? And what I tell people DEI stands for is diversity looks, inclusion asks, and equity acts. And so, and many times the equity piece of DEI has been the part that people don't pay a lot of attention to. But I'm telling you today, particularly now after the death of George Floyd, it is time to act. And I love the fact that now we have so many people involved in this movement that we are beginning to see action.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, and also a little bit of the history. So keeping in the spirit of systems of oppression, I want to ask this question to Dawn. How do we, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit in regards to and I like what you said about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so how do we fix these systems of oppression? Where do we even start, Dawn? And I know you do a lot of work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how do you consult businesses, and tell us how can we start to fix these systems of oppression?
Well, one of the first things is to acknowledge that they exist in the first place. it is very difficult for some people to just give language or give a voice to the systems that exist all over this country. And when you can make everyone aware of exactly what is in place, how it operates, and how it continues to disproportionately and strategically disenfranchise not only African Americans, but other people of color, then you have a starting point. Let me give you an example. One of the things I often share, and it's nice to have the educational background that I do, but I was a person who learned how to navigate within the system. And one of the barriers that exists for many people who look like me is if you want to go on to navigate at the doctoral level, which is part of the reason we do not see a lot of people who have PhDs in particular, is because there's a barrier that's put in place called the GRE. That GRE is not a matter of how smart you are or how intelligent you are, it's do you know how to take the test? If you don't know how to take the test, then you are more likely to be left out of being able to navigate at the graduate doctoral level. And so that is a system that exists in higher education. Research has shown for time after time after time and years now that the GRE is not a predictor of graduate success. And I would echo that. It does not tell you anything about how a student will be able to perform. However, we know that standardized tests are typically a feature that individuals who don't look like me do a job at performing. And so it then becomes a way in which you can strategically weed people out. And so what that does over time is to ensure that you have a system or a pool of people who look a particular way, who think a particular way, who have a particular way of navigating. So when you can acknowledge that and bring awareness to the fact that, yeah, that does exist. And yes, I have been able to navigate and benefit from that. And I don't need you to feel sorry. I don't need you to try to acknowledge or because that often comes into play as well. Just acknowledge it. And then let's work together to dismantle. But if we cannot get out of our own way because we're trying to justify or not recognize or bring awareness to the fact that systems exist, institutional racism is not something that just came about. It has always existed. Systemic barriers is not something that just came about. It has always existed. And if you want to navigate, Marcus alluded to this earlier, a colleague of mine used to always say, and I can speak to that, especially from an academic perspective, but even professionally in the spaces that I've been able to navigate globally, you have to almost leave it at the door, is what she used to say. And what she was referencing, and I will bring truth to that because I want everyone to listen clearly. You have to make sure that you're not that angry black man or black woman. You have to make sure that you are articulate and that you're able to fit in, and make sure that you don't say too much, because if you do, then you may create that same narrative that people already have about you, which then may mean you may be left out of an opportunity to navigate. I think, and one of the things I'll speak to that as well, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, my approach has always been, are we committed to this, or is this just a great PR effort? Because if it's great PR, I'm the wrong person to get involved with it. But if you are truly looking forward to change, if you are truly ready to acknowledge how you've benefited and the systems that exist, then we can work together so that we can move forward together. But if the objective is to justify and to deviate away from being able to just firmly call it what it is, then we're not able to move forward. We have to learn to dialogue across difference. That whole let's agree to disagree, that does not work. We have to give a voice to what exists. And once we can acknowledge it and sit in that, truly sit in that, and understand how 401 years we've had systems that have disproportionately and strategically put people who look like me on the outside, then we are able to look at ways in which we can move forward. But if we can't dive into that, or, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I don't want to talk about it, then that's part of the exact same systemic barrier or issue that exists. That's a form of privilege. What I would challenge everyone who has gathered here on this morning to do is to ask yourself, what's my status with privilege? What's my status with privilege? And please understand, it is not just racial privilege that exists. You would ask yourself, what's my status with privilege? then we have a foundation to begin dissecting where we are.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well said, Don. Well said, Dr. Don. Speaking of privilege, I believe we have a poll question that asks this exact question. Greg, can you pull up, I think it's poll question number 5.
Yes, and just popping in real quick, some folks have said they're not sure where to find the poll. If you're on one of the older versions of Zoom, there's a bar at the bottom of the window that says polling. If you're on a newer version, it should pop up automatically, and these are just as good if you're on your cell phone or if you're on your computer. So let me launch that poll now.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. Excuse me. If you are white, do you have white privilege? If you are white, do you have white privilege? Is the poll question. Yes, no, I'm not sure. And we'll pause here to give people a moment to answer this question. Again, as Greg said, if you have an older version of Zoom, there's a lower spot that says poll. And if you have an updated one, you should see it immediately. So again, if you are white, do you have white privilege? And do we have the results? 80% of the votes are in. And 88% said yes. 2 said no, and 6 are not sure. Beautiful. Thank you so much for participating. 88% said yes. If you are white, do you have white privilege? So I want to put this question out there to Varsovia and also to Samira as well. You know, so there are a lot of people, you know, it's great that the awareness here is 88% believe that if they are white, they do have white privilege. What is white privilege? But I also want to talk about this as well. There have been a lot of white people that are shocked about their white privilege and having a hard time understanding what this is. What is white privilege, and how is it that white people have been completely blindsided by the reality of Black people's plight in this country? I think the awareness of white privilege has really started to become more awakened in a lot of white people. So I'm going to toss this to Varsovia, and then also we'll start with Varsovia, then we'll go to Samira. What is white privilege, and you know, how have maybe sometimes white people have been blindsided by this?
So I'm going to define this my own way, right? And I want to start by defining it through unconscious bias. So if that's okay with everybody, I want to say that unconscious bias is our inability to see factual information, right? Our brain is telling us that we are safe, we're good around people who look like us, think and act like us. And the brain uses all these shortcuts to process tons of information. It's something, Dr. Don, like 1 million bits in a little bit of time. And that leads us to make snap decisions about who we prefer and who we avoid. Therefore, creating prejudices and preferences that cause biases, right? So these automatic preferences and prejudices are what remain prevalent in our consciousness, right? We saw the video. We have an African-American judge being sat in a corner, not being let in the elevator. The people who did that might not be aware. And I would venture to say that it is because of white privilege. Don explained how the design of our country has not allowed us, and I am brown. This screen makes me look a lot whiter than I am, by the way, for some reason. We just were not allowed to live in certain places. We were not allowed to do certain things, to read, to write, to have the basics in life, to have shelter. the way it's meant to be. But white people were not aware of that because the economic system is, what was building all of this stuff. The more you oppress, the better you live, right? That's the economics of it. So I think that unconsciously, the then majority in the United States failed to become aware that we are just filled with people, regardless of what we look like. And therefore, there is this white privilege. Now I think that because I live in a nice neighborhood, I went to college and so forth, I can dismiss the Black or the brown or funny looking person next to me because I've always had it, they didn't, right? So maybe Samaria can help me with a far better educated definition, but that's how I see it. I see it as someone believing that this is theirs. So, and we see it in everyday scenarios, Again, the video, I think, presents some very good examples of those privileges. I get the better table. If you're white, Caucasian, you get the better table. You get to go in the elevator. Somebody says the doctor is coming. You've never met the doctor. They're expecting a white male. They don't expect a woman or a Black or a brown or Asian doctor, and so forth.
Beautiful. Thank you, Varsovia. Yeah, and Samira, how would you define, white privilege, and, how have, I feel like George Floyd and all the others that have gone before him are, and I feel like a lot of white America is awakening to this, but, and it also reminds me of white fragility as well. There's a great book out there called White Fragility, and what that means. Like, are white people truly fragile to talking about race? So how would you define white privilege, perhaps even white fragility, and how have white people kind of been blindsided by this?
I believe that white privilege is simply having an unfair advantage because of your skin color, because of the fact that you're white. I think that, as Marcus mentioned, there was a period of time where the belief was if you work hard enough, if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you will gain success in this country. But I think that people didn't really realize how disadvantaged some people were, like Black and brown people. So I think that when you think about white privilege, you think about, like Dr. Don mentioned, professional tests that allow someone to go to college or not. There are disadvantages of Black people, brown people who don't always have the means to get extra support to pass those tests, right? I think it can become really simple that priorities are given, as Varsovia was saying, for people who are white before they are given to Black and brown people. And so white privilege can be perpetuated unknowingly. I think that white people sometimes feel as though we work hard, we do the right things, and we have success. It's as simple as that, but it's not. Privilege is systemic, the same way that oppression is systemic. And when we think about how it looks in this country, the images are there. If you take the white man who committed the church massacre a few years ago in the South, went into a church, killed 8 or 9 people, many of them were people of color. So he was arrested peacefully, and somehow before he got to the jail, they stopped at Burger King for him to get a sandwich, right? And so clearly this man committed this heinous act, a hate crime, and it was as though he hit a dog in a hit and run and was being arrested for that. And so we look at the violence towards Black and brown people in this country, more recently, Mr. Floyd, and you look at the charge that was very unclear of what he was being arrested for, and you look at what happened during that arrest, and you see the vast, vast disparity. No one's saying that when a person commits a crime, there shouldn't be punishment, but when you look at the privilege this white man experienced, and you look at what happened to Mr. Floyd, it makes it really simple to see that people are are benefited because of the color of their skin, and many are disadvantaged because of the color of their skin. And that's the only difference. When you talk about sentencing, you see how white men are sentenced compared to Black men. And of course, it's similar to women. There's an African American woman who was married, divorced, they had a child. At the time, she wanted the child to attend the school district of her ex-husband. He agreed. They used his dress. The district found out about it. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for quote unquote fraud. And then you look at this recent celebrity story where they have paid for, basically bought test scores, paid universities to grant their kids admission because they didn't qualify on their own terms, and they got 14 days in jail. And I'm not saying that either of those women should have been put in jail, but certainly we see the disparity, and it's clear that the underlying issue there is the color of their skin.
Hey, Chantel, can I chime in for 1 second?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I love what Samaria and Vesuvia said. Also, the only thing I would add is I think you can see white privilege in the fact that when you did the poll at the beginning, 100% of people said that they would never want to be in a Black person's shoes. I think secondly, Chris Rock stated it best several years ago in his stand-up when he said, there's a white busboy, there's a white one-armed busboy who wouldn't trade places with me, and I'm rich, right? And so there's a certain amount of this white privilege goes beyond just capital, meaning money. White privilege allows you to live a life where you don't have to worry about your child going out into the streets and being killed for something like carrying Skittles or playing with a toy gun, like Tamir Rice. And so when we look at white privilege, I sometimes when I have discussions with white audiences, I put it like this. I have tall privilege. I'm 6'7". And so I know for a fact that there are some advantages I have in life because I am tall and many people are shorter than I am. And I didn't have to do anything to be tall. Like that was a God-given thing that God gave me, this height. And so in this country, you have an unfair advantage. Yep, I can dunk. Most people can't dunk, Michael. I have an unfair, sometimes, well, all the time, white people have an unfair advantage based off of something that they had nothing to do with. They couldn't control the fact that they were born white, but in this country, you get rewarded for it. And what people are saying is, if you are not white, you get the opposite of the reward. You have a disadvantage, you get obstacles placed in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Don, did you?
Yeah, I'll just add one other thing to help people really ground this. Marcus mentioned this earlier about attending an HBCU, and I want to bring attention to this. White privilege is your history, which is our history, but your history being the curriculum, whereas my history is an elective, unless I attend a HBCU. That's white privilege. Your history, which is our history, is the curriculum, whereas my history is an elective.
That's a powerful statement right there. That is a powerful statement because it's true, and that's exactly right. And speaking of, and just real quick, Don, about HBCU and how the curriculum at an HBCU is on Black history, right? And I guess Marcus can speak to this as well. My sister also went to Howard, and they raise up the Black story. You know, they raise up the Black history that you don't ever get in predominantly white schools, public schools, and even in inner city schools where it's predominantly Black. You're still learning white history, which is our history. But yeah, and another way that white privilege has been articulated is white privilege, and this is something that that Megan writes on the panel, and I totally agree in the chat, is white privilege doesn't mean that you don't have a hard life. White privilege means It's that your race isn't one of those reasons that is making your life hard. And it's a set of unearned advantages that society gives to white people and withholds that from Black people and people of color. And thank you for writing that in the chat, Megan. And that was by Dr. Amanda Taylor from American University. And I think that also helps to ground the understanding of white privilege, is that because of your skin color is not giving you a harder life as it would others. So speaking of, sorry, did somebody else want to say a little something?
I just want to, might turn into a question actually for Don. I just want to make clear that, you know, the skin color has been perpetuated, race has been perpetuated into the scheme of things. But people really need to understand, you know, the powerful comment in the history that Don is sharing, that most of the colleges and universities in this country were started by people who owned slaves, we were not allowed to go to school technically until the 40s, right? The HBCU started what, in the 30s, Don, or so?
No, 18. The first HBCU.
That's right. That's right. But still, yeah. But still, we couldn't. I mean, there were, you know, it goes beyond that, and people need to understand that. I just had to emphasize it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Which also now leads us to our next poll question. About do you agree with this following statement? And so if we could kick up that one. So do you agree with the following statement? If a white person is not a member of the KKK or other white supremacist group, then they do not contribute to white supremacy. What do you guys think about that? Again, do you agree with the following statement? If a white person is not a member of the KKK or other white supremacist groups, then they do not contribute to white supremacy. Is that a yes or a no? So we'll give it a moment here for everyone to answer this poll question. And again, if you have an older version of Zoom, you should see the poll question at the bottom. That should pop up, or it should just pop up automatically on your screen. Do you agree with the following statement? If a white person is not a member of the KKK or other white supremacist group, then they do not contribute to white supremacy. So how are we doing? How many votes are in?
%86% have voted so far.
Okay. 86%. Get your votes in, yes or no. All right. What is the verdict? Okay. So no, the question, so 96% said no. If a white person is not a member of the KKK or other white supremacy group, then they do not contribute to white supremacy. 96% said no, 3 said yes. Okay, thank you for sharing those thoughts. All right, so panel, what is white supremacy? Is the question, or how do you define white supremacy? And let's kick this one off with Don. How do you define white supremacy? And if 90% or 96% said that if they don't belong to the KKK, then they're not contributing to white supremacy. So how would you define white supremacy?
So I'm going to tie that back to understanding white privilege, because I think you have to understand what the question is asking. And so oftentimes you see these radical groups such as the KKK or other individuals, especially some may say that the individuals who murdered Ahmaud Arbery would be an example of white supremacist system or a white supremacist. But I want to take it further than that, and I challenge everyone to listen to what I'm saying. If you don't say anything and you can turn an eye, you may think of it as the bystander effect, then you are contributing to a white supremacist system. If you go back to individuals during the early 1900s, and especially you even come to present day, and I'll ground it in this way. I oftentimes will have very in-depth conversations with my grandparents. And my grandmother attended school with Emmett Till. And I'll never forget, I now live in Washington, D.C. again. And I wanted to tour the African American Museum that's here in D.C. with my grandparents. They live in Dallas, Texas. And so they came here and we toured. I was actually living in Philly at the time, working at Jefferson. We drove down from Philadelphia to go to the African American Museum. And if you've never been to that museum, there is an exhibit that's dedicated to Emmett Till in there. My granny could not go in. And so we processed afterwards why. And she shared with me, she calls me DJ for Don Jr. She said, DJ, I remember what it was like when we went back to school that fall and how he was murdered. Fast forward to present day, one may say that Ahmaud Arbery's death, while not the exact same, is a demonstration of the exact same type of behavior that led to the murder of Emmett Till. So I think that we have to understand that while you may not directly be demonstrating or contributing to gunning down, murdering, or doing anything of that nature, if you don't say something about, or as a colleague of mine says, I don't need an ally, we need accomplice. That means that sometimes I need you to get up in front of it to also make sure that you are voicing the systemic barriers and making it aware that, yeah, I am privileged. Yes, I have been able to benefit from certain things. And I'll put it in this way to help people further understand. During this global pandemic that we're going through, not once have I worried about how I was going to pay my bills or how I was going to navigate. Because I have the privilege to be able to do the type of work that I have because I have an education that has allowed me to do that. Whereas some people, they are directly, considerately worried about, they don't know how they're going to make it from the next week to the next week, or they're truly living check to check, the economic dynamic that exists in this country. So if I don't say something or bring awareness to that and help understand why we have health disparities and everything else that's connected to economics that people wouldn't think about, doesn't mean that I'm not benefiting and or contributing to the problem. So I say that to say, because I want to make sure people are following me, white supremacy is, while it may show up in those forms, individuals who are KKK, or some may say, and I don't want to get into too much of that because that's a different conversation for a different time, but the political climate in this country would resemble a lot of forms of white supremacy. And like I said, I will leave that there for now. You can marinate on that. I think we have to be careful to know that even if I'm not exhibiting that same type of bigotry or so forth, if I don't say anything, then I'm also still contributing to the problem.
Beautiful. Well said, Don. I also want to ask Samira for her thoughts on this. How do you define white supremacy, and and how else would you kind of add to that?
I believe that it's a belief, and sometimes it could be an unconscious belief or subconscious belief that white people are superior to people of other racial backgrounds. And I believe that white supremacy does go back to privilege. It's when you are benefiting, you have a better quality of life or more opportunity because of the color of your skin. I think that women can often perpetuate white supremacy, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, by what women support. I think that there is a lot of conversation around why are people able to do certain things, the police brutality, acts of violence, hate crimes toward Black and brown people, and the fact that white people don't speak up, like Dr. Don is saying, I believe that when we don't speak up, we are supporting supremacy, whether we feel like, well, whether we realize it or not. I think sometimes people say, I don't know what to say. I don't want to offend anybody. We went through a whole era of being politically correct. And so folks didn't want to say the wrong thing. And so that equated silence. But I think that we're at a point now where a line has been made that if we do not speak up, we are in fact supporting supremacy, and we are using, white people are using privilege as an armor to not get involved. But I often believe that Black people champion causes for white people and support it and get behind it, the feminist movement, family issues. And I feel like the same is not for white people supporting Black issues. There has been an uprising with this protest about racial injustices and police brutality, and that's amazing, but this can't be a trend. And I think that supremacy can be perpetuated when white people feel like it doesn't directly impact me. I hate what's happening. I hate that this guy got killed. It was terrible, but it had to have been like a freak accident. I think that sometimes is that ideology, when instead it's not, it's a tactic, And so I think that we have to look at the ways that we are impacted by supremacy, and white people have to look at how am I directly contributing to it, knowingly or unknowingly, and then take action to become truly an ally and an anti-racist.
Exactly. Thank you guys so much for your thoughts on that. And really, to sum it up, it's if you are being quiet about this issue about Black people getting murdered constantly and in the streets, and through all what we're talking about in terms of the systems, you are contributing to a white supremacy society because of your silence. And I appreciate what you did say, Samira, about like some white people seeing Black people being murdered in the streets is like, oh my God, that's a freak accident, whereas actually, no, this has been happening for 400 years. And we need you to recognize this, because you being silent, you seeing this as a freak accident is contributing to the white supremacy society that we are living in. And I think that's a very important point to reiterate, that if you are silent, if you are not speaking up, if you are not taking action, you are contributing to a white supremacy society. So I kind of want to ask that question again, that poll question. Have we changed some minds? Can we put it up there again? Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So again, do you agree with the following statement after this conversation and these new thoughts? If a white person is not a member of the KKK or other white supremacist group, then do they not contribute to white supremacy after having this conversation? So we'll give it a pause. We're asking this question again to see if people understand. It looks like Marcus has something he wants to add.
Yeah, I'll just say, Shantae, when I read the question, I was confused, right? And the part that confused me at the second part of it was that then they do not contribute to the white supremacy. I didn't even know how to answer that because it took me in different ways. I don't know if it should be explained, because when I saw that response from people, I was like, I think that's the wrong response. Oh, well, I shouldn't say wrong, but it was a surprising response. But I think part of it could be because of the way the question's phrased.
Word. Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. And that could be a blip on our side of not being clear to articulate what we mean. So that could just be an error of asking a clear question. So I apologize for that. So thank you. And maybe that was confusing. So let's see what the poll says now. And hopefully
63% of people have responded. While that's going, there's a Q&A down at the bottom. There's a lot of great commentary going on in the chat here, and there's been so much great information discussed already and more to come. If you attendees would like to participate in the discussion or have a question you'd like the panelists to answer, the Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen. Looks like 2 little chat boxes. And there are 3 in there, so you can even go in and upvote or like a question that you think we should absolutely ask the panel. So please go in and participate there, and thank you for continuing to participate respectfully in the chat.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that, Greg. And yeah, we are going to get to those Q&As. Okay, so same thing. So 88% said no, and 6 or 12% said yes. Okay. All right. Thank you for doing that again. Yeah, so yes, thank you, and continue to put your questions in the chat. We will get there in probably like five minutes or so. So I want to switch gears a little bit and really talk about actually this question's yeah, I kind of wanted to get to really talking about, because there's a couple of ways that we can go here. We'll go for one more thing, and then I'll get to a more of a psychology question here. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the racist comments that don't feel like they're perhaps maybe racist to some people, and talking about, you know, let's discuss and address the many racist comments that are seen, and why don't all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. And I want to give that question to Marcus, and discussing the difference between all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I think, you know, first people should understand that we would have never had the phrase Black Lives Matter if Black Lives Matter. And so to me, it's really simple. Someone put it, they said, it's like if you're living on a block and every so often these 2 houses keep catching on fire, and you know, you have to keep putting the fire out at these 2 houses on a block full of houses. And so it doesn't mean that all the houses on the block don't matter, but it means that we have to address these 2 houses because they keep catching on fire. And that's how it feels for Black folks. Like, it feels like we've constantly been on fire for 401 years. And so that short phrase, Black Lives Matter, just simply means that until there's equality and until there's justice for all, serious justice for all, that we need to raise up this group of folks, because our actions as a country, as individuals, as groups, have continually proven that Black lives aren't as valued as other lives in this country. And I wish I could find this study. I saw this white professor in a video on YouTube of this white professor who actually broke down, he did a whole study on the value of lives based on based on the justice system, like what happens when you have the same people, you know, different people with very, very similar backgrounds, except for race, and what happened in the criminal justice system, on education, on how much people got paid, on the mortality rates, on the infant mortality rates of their babies. And what he found was that the most valued life in America was a white woman, followed secondly by a white man. And at the bottom of that was the Black man, based on this unbiased research that he did. And so if you take his research at face value, it says to you that Black lives don't matter. And so anyone who has, and I've seen people say this, as soon as you say Black lives matter, they say all lives matter, that is another form of supremacy, because it dismisses the disadvantages of a certain group. It dismisses the fact that, and the reason you have so much vitriol and passion and protest that's happening now is because this didn't just start, like all of this passion and feelings didn't come up from the Black community because of George Floyd. Like, George Floyd was another Black man who unfortunately was killed during police brutality, a public lynching. But that's not the first time we've seen that. But this is the first time we've had the response from all of America and all over the world. And so this is an opportunity for us to really shine a light on why Black lives must matter, because until Black lives matter, this country will never be the beacon of hope that it continues to promise. And if there's a weak link in a chain, that chain thereby is useless. And so in America, the weak link in our chain right now has always been its mistreatment, and I'll throw some other stuff in here, of Black folks, of Native American Indians, of Japanese folks, of immigrants, right? And so until we can make sure that our systems give everybody a fair and equal shot, then we're going to continue to chant Black Lives Matter. Because, and if you want people to stop saying Black Lives Matter, then make them matter, right? And then show action in that. Like, show us how, like, I'll argue with anyone when they say to me, well, we believe that, America is not racist. And America, like, what about affirmative action, right? And all we keep hearing, every time we turn around, we keep hearing all of this stuff that we have to, and these are real conversations that I'm having with some very high level, influential leaders in the white community. Well, why is it every time there's always these crimes, and there's always black people kill Black people more than anyone else kill Black people? Well, that is true. But the psychology of that is, the numbers say about 88% of crime against Black people happens by Black people. But guess what? In terms of murders, in the white community, about 78% of murders on white. And so what that tells us is people commit crimes against people who look like them for the most part. And so ours is a little bit higher than the white community, but that makes sense because we're dealing with much more poverty. We're dealing with much more anguish. We're dealing with less hope for the future because of how this country has treated us. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, in my opinion, I think it is the central piece of protest that we have to continue to keep at the forefront. Last thing, Chantel, I was at the forefront of when Starbucks had the issue 2 years ago, and Dante and Rashad were arrested at a Starbucks here in Philadelphia. Starbucks head, Virginia Tenpenny, who's the head of Global Impact, reached out to me because I did an op-ed at the time and wanted to come to fly from Seattle to Philadelphia to sit down with me to talk about what happened. And we had a 3-hour meeting, awesome meeting. I told Starbucks I would work with you to help in the Philadelphia community with what was happening with young Black boys and girls in Philadelphia. And then this morning I woke up to an article that says that Starbucks will no longer, will not allow their employees to wear anything that says Black Lives Matter, right? It prohibits any of their staff, employees from wearing Black Lives Matter. So I can show you the text message. I sent a text message to the executive team at 6 o'clock this morning. And I said to them, I'll read it here. And this is how important Black Lives Matter is to me. I sent it to Virginia Tenpenny, their COO, who's a Black woman, Roz. And I said, this feels like Starbucks is going in the wrong direction. I got involved with your company thinking they supported equality. This is completely wrongheaded, right? And so I say to all of our Black, white, brown brothers and sisters, Black Lives Matter, and we need to be shouting it at the top of our lungs. And to Dr. Dunn's point, we no longer need allies. What we need is white co-conspirators, because allies are people who respond to issues. Co-conspirators are people who plan to be able to address problems before they become a problem. So we need people to be more proactive.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well said. I want to be mindful of our time and also be able to get to questions. And I just wanted to put something else out there that I wanted to direct a question to Samira and Varsovia, this last one. And yes, and that is about self-care and our mental health, where there's a lot happening both on, you know, particularly in the Black community and the mental health of Black community, and just the distress and this happening again. Here's another one. But also, you know, in the white community as well, in terms of recognizing, you know, and learning and unlearning what they've been learning, you know, their whole life. So I want to direct the question to Samira and then Varsovia about self-care and the importance and what we can do, you know, from a mental health standpoint to support ourselves. So just a quick, you know, 2 minutes, and then we're going to get to question and answer.
Sure.
So take it away,
Self-care-
Samira.
Thank you. Self-care is not optional. I think if we want to show up for ourselves, our loved ones, our community, this movement for change, we must take care of ourselves. And I think self-care sometimes gets a bad rap because people think about women and spa days, and that can be a part of it. But self-care is a lifestyle. I think you have to get back to the basics, making sure that you're eating well, staying hydrated, moving your body, engaging in your home and in your community in practical ways. Humans thrive when they have community, and I know the pandemic is impacting that, but I think we must use technology to stay in touch with our family and our friends and have some normalcy there. I think that we also must remember that self-care has to be a daily habit. We shower and brush our teeth every day. We must care for ourselves deeply every day. I think about self-care in terms of nourishing your mind, your body, your spirit, and your heart. And I feel like when we embrace it as a lifestyle, it gives us the fuel to continue showing up for these things, because this injustice didn't just start, as we've all said, and you're not going to turn it around in 90 days. This is a long game. And so if you want to be in the race, if you want to be in the movement, we must take care of ourselves so that we have the bandwidth to show up and do good work in the world. I will also say that we have to be mindful of boundaries. I know many people are working from home, they have families, work can be more dynamic with what's happening with the pandemic and the injustices and protests and all of it. We must have hours that we're working and hours that you're taking care of yourself and not work. I know some people's jobs, Marcus, Don, have they're high level and it's not always 9 to 5, but having some time for yourself, that you're not on your phone, that you're not doing and putting out energy can be very helpful also.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Varsovia, just your thoughts on self-care during this challenging time.
I think it is truly important to know yourself, to understand your fears, to understand why you do things. And I think everyone should look into the unconscious bias test. It's a good start to help you learn about your day-to-day avoidance and preferences. And I also think you need to take the findings, look at yourself deeper, take those findings and look back at the things that you have done unconsciously or consciously when you cross the street because 2 Black guys wearing hoodies are coming towards you. People do that unconsciously sometimes. Or why do you think you don't need to listen to me because I have an accent and you dismiss me, for example. And then you need to take those results and emotionally reprogram yourself to get rid of those thoughts and to change your behavior, to change your language, to be able to just live well with others. You don't need to move in with others, but you do owe everyone respect and consideration and decency, regardless of whether you're just walking past a stranger or you're in the same room with them. I know a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on their professional lives. Take the darn test if you haven't. And promote training, promote dialogue, envision positiveness in your life when you're interacting with others. Whether they're Caucasians, Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, just be positive and internalize the positive. not the negative. And ask yourself the question, how can I contribute to make my community better? In your community, because I'm sure there are probably people out of state, I don't know, or who are traveling maybe in this panel with the internet. Your community is now global. It's not just Philly. But where we are physically, that's where we start. We don't see the pain of the people in the South. The South of the United States, I will never live in the Southern United States. I hope I stick to that. Because it's so overt how we are treated. People are not, they're not shy. They think it's okay to tell me I have an accent. And what am I doing here? And do I vote? And am I an American? Basically, the question is, do I have a right to be here? You're darn right that I have a right to be here. We all do. But we want decency, respect, and consideration in all we do. And we all, regardless of our backgrounds, would be a lot happier.
Thank you, Varsovia. Thank you for your words and wisdom. So now I want to turn it over to Q&A. We have a bunch of questions here, and we're not going to have time to get to all of them. So I'm looking through, and I don't even know where to start. We have about 9 questions, which is amazing. Yeah, let's see. I have a question here. How will we ever attain racial justice in this country as long as our government leaders are bought and paid for by the prison industrial complex, the pharmaceutical and insurance companies, the gun manufacturers, and all the other big money corporate rulings elites that profit by our current system? So how will we ever attain racial justice due to that? Who would like to take that question?
I can answer that, and I will, in the interest of time, wrap it up in this way. I just said this the other day on a different call. We're not going to be able to do this overhaul and just change everything at one time. So we have to acknowledge that. And sometimes it's really easy to just do this. That won't work. So what we have to do is work within the system that we have. And with us already knowing that, that's nothing new. We know that. So when we're putting people in positions of power who are expected to be able to lead on our behalf, make sure that we hold them accountable. But you also have to make sure that you understand who you're putting in office to ensure that we can change that. Because to dismantle a system, we are not going to be able to just overthrow it. That's not going to happen. So we need to work within the system. Voting is critical. I'm going to encourage everybody, please make sure you vote in November, because a lot of times we will make a lot of noise and not participate in the very systems and justify our rationale for not doing so. So we have to work within the system. We have to hold the people accountable who we put in office, and then we can dismantle the systems. If not, since we know that stuff is happening, and yet we keep putting people in who are allowing that to continue to happen, then we are just as guilty to contribute to that same system. But I think we have to work within the system that we have, hold people accountable that we put in office. Don't lose the energy. That's the other thing I want to emphasize. I love what we're seeing all over the world. And on behalf of the murder of George Floyd, let's not lose that energy. Keep that same energy going, moving forward, so that we can continue to dismantle the systems. Because if not, I guarantee you, and I hate to even say this, I said this the other day speaking to the Congressional Black Caucus, I don't anticipate seeing the change in my lifetime, and I'm 34. I hate to even say that, but it is a systemic barrier that we are comfortable with because we don't like being uncomfortable. Beautiful. So if we are to change it, we already know that, then let's change it, but let's work within the system that we have to then move it forward.
Beautiful. Thank you. And well said. Please like the question so I know which questions are very pertinent to you. The next question here, and we got to do this in 2 to 3 minutes because we have a closing thing we want to do as well. Why does the official Black Lives Matter platform address issues unrelated to racial injustice in America, such as rejecting the Jewish people's right to freedom and self-determination in Israel and rejecting Jewish Americans' right to support Israel? Is that helpful to the cause? Is it divisive to Jewish people who want to support Black Lives Matter? Who'd like to take that question?
I'll attempt to. and first I'll say that, I'm a person, I lived in Israel about 20 years ago. I lived in Haifa. And I just went back to Israel last year. I'm a part of AIPAC, which is American Israeli Progressive Action Committee, a pretty powerful lobbying group in DC. And we went there to meet with the heads last year, to meet with the heads of the Palestinians as well as the Israelis. And I'm not as well versed on Black Lives Matter's stance, but I can tell you from the stance of many Black people that I talk with, many Black people, they are impartial to the Palestinians' plight, and they tend to sometimes feel that the Palestinians were unfairly, because of colonialism and because of Britain decided to support the Jews going back into Israel and taking over that land. They felt like that intervention by England wasn't right in 1948. And so, and then, a lot of their stance comes from not just what's happened in this past century, but what goes back 3,000 years. And when you start to think about, not to go too deep, when you start to think about, this was a fairly recent phenomenon over the last five or six decades that we began to call it the Middle East. Before that, it was really known as Northern Africa. And so there's just so much history behind some of the political stuff that we hear in the US. And so we have to understand that a lot of that information is filtered through us, through a media that has a political agenda. And so I'm not saying I agree with the Black Lives stance on this, because I can see both sides of this argument, but it's very divisive in our country, and you can get caught up in that. But I think it's awesome that Black Lives Matter is focused on things that are global versus just what's happening here in the US, because it all is relevant and it all impacts us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So we have to close out. Thank you guys so much for your questions. I'm hopeful that we can do this again, and we can take note of these questions and perhaps get back to you in some way. We also have some resources that can support all of you that are on this call. We can email that out to you in terms of racial justice issues, things that you can do. We're talking about do something, be active, don't support, don't be silent. So we can email you a whole bunch of resources there. So be on the lookout for that. And also let us know if you would like to do this again. Was this helpful? I know this is last minute, but I don't know if there's a poll we can put out there of, do we want to have these conversations again? Will you attend? Maybe just write yes in the chat. I don't know if it's too late to ask Greg to put out a poll, but we can certainly have that. I also think I saw in the chat, how come there wasn't a white woman on the panel? I will say I've asked a couple of white people that I wanted to be on the panel. They couldn't make it. So yes, they were definitely part of the discussion in planning this panel. And we will definitely have somebody of white background, and their perspective as well. And we did think about that. They weren't able to make it. And of course, there's many white people. So if you are somebody that would like to be a part of the conversation, let us know as well. So do we want to do this again? Hopefully there's a loud sounding yes. I want to play a video before we close. So I'm going to ask Greg to cue the video now and also share with us the quick poll. I realize we're not giving many people enough time, but it looks like yes is the answer. Wow, 100% said yes. Okay, wonderful. So it sounds like we are doing this again. So stay tuned. Let's play the video and then we'll wrap up with our last moment here.
I'm telling you already.
But just like life. All right.
Air Jordan ready to air it on.
say amen.
And welcome to the very first National Oprah Winfrey Show!
Brothers, I have a dream today.
Black people have contributed so much to this country and so much of our culture, as you can see here. And if you agree, please type in Black Lives Matter into the chat. There's been so many powerful moments and how Black people have contributed to the American society and culture and country, and Black lives do matter. And if you agree, I would love for you to type in the chat Black Lives Matter and continue the conversation, call racism out, and let's all do something to support Black lives. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I want to say thank you to Marcus Allen, Varsovia Fernandez, Myra Williams, Dondra Hahn, and all the people behind the scenes, Greg Offner, Larry Russell, who allowed us to be on this and with the Rittenhouse Networking Group, Peter, Michael, and Jeff, and John. Thank you guys so much for helping the behind the scenes. And yes, a big shout out to Greg and Peter and Larry and Michael for helping us. And thank you panelists, Marcus Allen, Varsovia Fernandez, Myra Williams, and Dr. Don Trahan Jr. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks to all of you who are participating and engaged in our panel discussion today. Thank you so much. Black Lives Matter, and we'll be in soon and follow up with you on the next panel and more information to do something. Thank you all so much.